Welcome back to Study Tips for IGCSE Biology. Today's topic is related to organism and their environment. Without further delay, let's begin. In this chapter, you will find out about how food chain and food webs describe energy flow between living organisms, pyramid of numbers, how energy is lost in the transfer between trophic levels, pyramid of biomass, nutrient cycles such as carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, and water cycle, and finally factors affecting population growth. Ecology. Ecology is the study of the interaction between living organisms and their environment. The area where an organism lives is called habitat. Many tadpoles in a pond forming a population of tadpoles, but that ball would not be the only organism living in a pond. There will be many other kinds of animals and plants making up the pond community. The living organism in the pond, the water, the stone, the mud at the bottom make up an ecosystem. Within the ecosystem, each living organism has its own life to live and role to play. The way in which an organism lives its life in ecosystem is called niche. Diagram A illustrates a pond and its inhabitant, an example of an ecosystem, where you have the pond and its inhabitants make up an ecosystem. All the organisms of one species make up a population. The pond is a habitat, and all the inhabitants of the pond make up the community. This is a slightly definition about population, ecosystem, and community. Population is a group of organisms of one species living in the same area at the same time. Ecosystem is a unit containing all of the organisms and their environment interacting together in a given area. Example, decomposing log or a lake. Whereas community is all of the population of different species in an ecosystem. Energy transfer in food chain. All living organisms need energy. They get energy from food by respiration. All the energy in an ecosystem originates from the sun. Some of the energy in sunlight is captured by plants and used to make food glucose, starch, and another organic substances such as fat and protein. These contain some of the energy from the sunlight. When the plants need energy, it breaks down some this food by respiration. Animals get their food and therefore the energy by ingesting eating plants or by eating animals which have eaten plants. The sequence by which energy, in the form of chemical energy, in food passes from the plant to animals and then to other animals is called food chain. Many different food chains link to form a food web. So diagram on the left is actually illustrate about a food chain and also food web. Pyramid of numbers. Every food chain begins with green plants because only they can capture the energy from sunlight. They are called producer because they produce food. Animals are consumer, and animals which eat plants in eats a primary consumer because it is the first consumer in a food chain. An animal which eats plants, it is a primary consumer because it is the first consumer in a food chain. Primary consumers are also called herbivore, and higher level consumers are carnivores. A pyramid of numbers show the population at each stage in a food chain. As energy is passed along a food chain, some of it lost to the environment. This happens in many ways. First, when an organism uses food for respiration, some of the energy released from the food is lost as heat energy to the environment. Second, when one organism eats another, it is rarely eats absolutely all of it. For example, the grasshopper in the food chain diagram D may eat almost all of the part of the plant above ground, but it will not eat the roots. So, not all of the energy in the plant is transferred to the grasshopper. Third, when an animal eats another organism as food enzyme in its digestive system, break down most of the large food molecule so that they can be absorbed. But not all of the food molecule are digested and absorbed, and the ones that are not eventually lost from the body in the feces. These feces contain energy that is lost from this food chain. This means that the further you go along a food chain, the less energy is available for each successive group organism. Refer to diagram D. The plants get a lot of energy from the sun, but only a fraction of this energy is absorbed by the flycatcher. In this slide, is actually trying to explain about how energy is lost in the transfer between tropic level and pyramid biomass. Diagram C show the number of organisms in the food chain is shown as a pyramid, is called tropic level. The pyramid in this shape because there is less energy available as you go up the tropic level. So there are fewer organisms at each level. This loss of energy limits the length of food chain. They rarely have more than 5 tropic levels as there is not enough energy left to support the 6. So refer to diagram E. It shows a differently shaped pyramid of numbers. The pyramid in this shape because of the sizes biomass of the organism in the food chain. Although there is only a single tree, it is huge compared with the caterpillar which feed on it. If you make the area of the block represent the mass of the organism instead of their numbers, then the pyramid becomes the right shape again. It is called pyramid of biomass. Diagram F gives a much better idea of the actual quantity of animal of plant material at each tropic level. Let's take one of the example diagram E. Diagram E is actually an inverted pyramid of numbers. The pyramid in this shape because one tree may provide food for hundreds of caterpillars. A tree which is a primary producer to a caterpillar, which is a tree, is a primary producer to a caterpillar. A tree, this shape, you can see a tree is a very single shape because one tree is just a represent a number. One tree is actually may provide food for hundreds of caterpillar. You see at the tropic level 2, caterpillar is a represent in a big box as compared to a tree. And the caterpillar is a primary consumer to a bird. So you can see the diagram caterpillar is a slightly bigger than a bird. Okay, but it's different from diagram F because for diagram F, a pyramid is represented in a form of biomass. So a tree shows in this diagram is a slightly bigger than a caterpillar diagram, as well as bird feed on the caterpillar. Nutrient cycles. Nutrient cycle is defined as a cyclic pathway by which nutrients pass through in order to be recycled and reutilized. The pathway comprises of cells, organism, community, and ecosystem. Nutrient recycling involves both biotic and abiotic components. The main abiotic components are air, water, soil. Recycling of carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen, potassium, and etc. are recycled, where oxygen occur in the water, air, and soil, whereas calcium, phosphorus, potassium, and etc. are recycled mainly in soil and are available locally. The carbon recycle. Carbon is very important component of living things because it is an essential part of carbohydrate, fats, and protein. Organisms shows how carbon circulate through an ecosystem. The air contains 0.04% carbon dioxide. During plants photosynthesis, carbon atom from carbon dioxide become part of glucose or starch molecule in a plant. Some of the glucose is broken down by the plant in respiration, then it released back into the air. Some of the carbon in the plant will be eaten by animals. The animals respire, releasing some of it back into the air as carbon dioxide. When the plant or animal dies, decomposers will feed on them. The carbon become parts of the decomposer's body. When they respire, they release carbon dioxide into the air again. Below is actually definition for decomposer. Decomposer is an organism that gets its energy from dead or waste organic matter. The nitrogen cycle. Living things need nitrogen to make proteins. There is plenty of nitrogen around. The air is about 78% nitrogen gas. Molecule of nitrogen gas and two are made of two nitrogen atoms joined together. These molecules are very inert, which means that they will not readily react with other substances. So although the air is full of nitrogen, it is in such an unreactive form that plants and animals cannot use it at all. It must first be changed into a more reactive form such as ammonia or nitrates. Changing nitrogen gas into a more active form is called nitrogen fixation. Refer to diagram H. So there are several ways that it can happen, like via lightning, artificial fertilizer, nitrogen fixing bacteria. Lightning makes some of the nitrogen gas in the air combine with oxygen, forming nitrogen oxide. They dissolve in rain and are washed into the soil where they form nitrates. Artificial fertilizers like nitrogen and hydrogen can be made to react in an industrial chemical process, forming ammonia. The ammonia is used to make ammonium compound and nitrate, which are sold as fertilizer. Nitrogen fixing bacteria. These bacteria live in the soil or in root nodules, small swelling on plants like pea, bean, and clover. One kind is called rhizobium. They use nitrogen gas from the air spaces in the soil and combine it with other substances to make ammonium, ions, and other compounds. Once the nitrogen has been fed, it can be used to make protein. Animals eat the plants, so animals get their nitrogen in the form of protein. When animals or plants die, bacteria and fungi decompose the body. So the protein containing nitrogen is broken down to ammonium, ions, and this is released. The nitrogen cycle, another group of bacteria called nitrifying bacteria, turn this iron into nitrates, which plant can use again. Nitrogen is also returned to the soil when animals excrete nitrogenous waste material which they have produced by deamination of excess amino acids. It may be in the forms of ammonia or urea. Again, nitrifying bacteria will convert it to nitrates. A third group of bacteria complete the nitrogen cycle. They are called denitrifying bacteria because they undo the work done by nitrifying bacteria. They turn nitrates and ammonia in the soil into nitrogen gas, which goes into the atmosphere. The water cycle. Diagram I show how water cycles between living organisms and their environment. Living things, especially trees, play a very important role in the cycle. When precipitation occurs, the tree roots absorb water from the soil. The water travels up through xylem vessels into the leaves, where some of it evaporates and diffuses out of the stomata as water vapor. Next, we look at population size. Population size, first is birth rate and death rate. The size of a population depends on how many individuals leave the population and how many enter it. Individuals leave a population when they die or when they migrate to another population. Individuals enter a population when they are born or when they migrate into the population from elsewhere. Usually, birth and death are more important in determining population size than immigrations and immigration. A population increases if new individuals are born faster than the old one dies. That is when the birth rate is greater than the death rate. If birth rate is less than death rate, then the population will decrease. If birth rate and death rates are equal, the populations will stay the same size. Factors that affecting population growth. An experiment has been conducted to identify the factors that may affect the population growth rate. Let's look at example below. Yeast. Yeast limiting factors is the population may be limited when yeast are not getting enough food left and there is so much alcohol produced which might poison themselves. The cells are dying and stop population. Like rabbit, a population of rabbit might be affected by the numbers of foxes and other predators. And other than that is due to the amount of food, lack of amount of food, and the amount of space for burrow. And finally, the rabbit limiting factors that affect population's growth is because of infection by the virus which causes myxomatosis. And the third example is about snowshoe's hare. Limiting factors could be affected due to food supply. Whenever the snowshoe's population rises, the lynx population also rises, and shortly afterward, as the lynx now have more food to eat. And finally, this presentation slide is about to explain about the age pyramids. If you can see from this diagram, GA is a bottom-heavy pyramid because there are far more young individuals than old ones. And this indicates that the birth rate is greater than death rate. As such, these populations is considered as increasing. And whereas diagram JB is a stable population, the sizes of the younger age group are only a little larger than the older one, so this population should not change much in sizes. So with that being said, I hope you enjoy and study, and please subscribe to this channel because there will be more information uploaded. Thank you very much for listening.